Have you ever felt so alone that you find yourself talking to the moon? It's a strange, universal human habit. We look up at that silent silver-white glow, and we pour out our secrets, our hopes, and our heartaches. We treat it like a faithful friend, a quiet witness to our lives who will never judge and never interrupt. We talk and we hope on some deep subconscious level that we are never truly unseen, forgotten, or unloved. For 18-year-old Selena, this wasn't just a habit. It was her only lifeline. But what Selena didn't know, what none of us know, is that for centuries someone has been listening. This isn't a story about a lonely girl. It's a story about what happens when the man in the moon isn't a myth, and he breaks every rule in the cosmos just to answer one person's call. And that is the story we are diving into today. Before we move further into this cosmic connection, if you love deep emotional stories that bend the line between sci-fi and the human heart, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and definitely subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next tale. We are trying to build a community of story lovers right here, and every single subscription, every single comment helps this channel reach a larger audience. We need your hype. I am always so curious to see how global this community is. Drop a comment below letting me know what part of the world you're listening from. And of course, let me know your suggestions for future stories. All right? Thank you for that. Settle in. Let's begin the story. The Girl Named Moon. In the small, secluded town of Arbor Falls, tucked away in the dense, rainy forests of the Pacific Northwest, lived a girl who was an expert on loneliness. Her name was Selena, and it was a name that carried a beautiful, painful irony. Selena is a name of Greek origin, and it means moon, or more powerfully, moon goddess. But Selena was no goddess. She was 18 years old, and for the last 6 months she had been a ghost. Her parents were gone, taken in a sudden, senseless car accident on the slick, winding highway that led out of town. Now she was an orphan, living all by herself in the quiet 2-story house that was still full of their things. Their coats were still by the door. Her father's coffee mug was still by the sink. Arbor Falls wasn't a big, anonymous city where you could disappear. It was a quaint, small town, the kind that prides itself on its close-knit community. It was a town of bake sales, high school football, and picket fences. And in a town where everyone knows everyone, being an outcast, being the orphan girl, was a special kind of suffocating isolation. People didn't talk to her. They whispered about her. They'd see her in the grocery store and give her that sad, tilted head look, the "oh you poor thing" expression that made her feel more like a stray animal than a person. At school it was worse. She was a senior, but she walked the halls like a shadow. She had no friends. The ones she had before the accident had slowly, awkwardly drifted away, not knowing what to say to the girl whose world had ended. So Selena ate her lunch alone at the end of a long, loud cafeteria table. She walked home alone, the sound of her own footsteps echoing on the damp pavement. She unlocked the door to a dark, silent house. Her days were a blur of managing the unbearable quiet, but her nights had a ritual. Every night, no matter what, Selena would go up to her bedroom, turn off the lights, and slide open her window. She'd sit on the floor, wrap her arms around her knees, and look up at her only friend. The moon. This was her lifeline. This was her therapy. Psychologists call it anthropomorphism, the human drive to find social connections even with inanimate objects. For Selena, it was simpler. The moon was the only one who would listen. "Hi," she'd whisper, her voice small in the dark. "Me again." And she would talk. She would pour out everything. School was loud today. Mrs. Gable asked me about my calculus homework, and I just nodded. I don't think I said a single word out loud all day. Is it possible to just forget how to talk? She'd watch a cloud pass over the bright silver disc. I found Dad's old guitar in the closet today. It's still out of tune, just like he left it. I can't bring myself to touch it. It's so stupid. It's just a thing, but it still feels like him. I miss him so much. I miss them so much. She would talk for an hour, sometimes 2. She told the moon about the mean girl in her English class, about the way the house creaked at night, about her fear of the future, about her crushing, overwhelming loneliness. She would cry silently, the tears tracking down her cheeks. And the moon, her companion in loneliness, would just hang there, a faithful witness in the sky, shining a soft, gentle light into her dark room. It was her one comfort, her one desperate act of hope that she was never truly unseen. She had absolutely no idea how right she was, because hundreds of thousands of miles away in the cold, sterile silence of the void, Someone was listening to every single word. The Watcher in the Void. His designation was Monitor 734, but his name, in his own ancient language, translated to something like Zephyr. It was a name heavy with meaning. It meant West Wind and Lonely One. It was a fitting name for a being who had spent the last 2 centuries of his life in a small, isolated monitoring station, hidden in the dark shadow of Earth's moon. Zephyr was a member of an ancient, hyper-advanced civilization, a commonwealth of beings who had long ago evolved past the need for messy things like war, hunger, and emotion. They were a people of pure cold logic, and they were, above all else, watchers. His people were the real man in the moon, the strange, persistent myths that dotted human history of a man banished to the moon, a prisoner doomed to watch the Earth forever. They weren't just stories. They were the garbled cultural echoes of his people's long, silent, solitary vigil. Zephyr's duty was governed by one single sacred law, the Prime Directive, the Non-Interference Directive. This law was absolute. It was not just a set of rules. It was a philosophy, and it was born from a galaxy-shattering trauma. Eons ago, his people had made a different choice. They had found a promising, primitive species on a planet called Riel, and in an act of what they saw as benevolence, they gave them advanced technology. They taught them science. They uplifted them. That species, unable to handle the sudden leap in power, started a nuclear war and annihilated their entire planet in less than a year. The Commonwealth learned the hardest lesson in the universe. To a developing world, interference is not help. It is contamination. It is poison. So the new law was written in the ashes of Riel. Watch, observe, log, but never interfere. No identification of self or mission. No contact ever. For 200 years, Zephyr had obeyed. His job was to monitor the noise of humanity. And it was noise. He heard it all. A roaring, chaotic static of 7 billion minds. He heard the prayers, the stock market trades, the political speeches, the traffic reports, the arguments, the declarations of love. It was a meaningless, overwhelming cacophony. He had learned to filter it, to turn it down to a dull roar. Until 18 years ago, he had isolated a new signal. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a demand. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated loneliness. A 5-year-old girl in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, whispering to the moon because she was afraid of the dark. Her name was Selena. Amidst the roaring static of the entire planet, her voice was a single, clear, perfect note. He had broken protocol just a little. He had configured the station's sensors to focus on her signal. It was his private project, his secret. He had listened as she learned to read. He'd listened to her fight with her parents about a curfew. He'd listened to her cry over her first crush. And then, 6 months ago, he had listened to the single, piercing scream of grief when the police officers came to her door. He had listened to her silent, gut-wrenching sobs in the nights that followed. He, a being from a race that had abandoned emotion, had begun to feel. Her loneliness mirrored his own. He was the lonely one trapped in his station. She was the lonely one trapped in her house. They were the same. And he, a logical, post-human watcher, had committed the most illogical act in the universe. He had fallen in love. Tonight, it was her 18th birthday. He watched her on his monitor, a faint thermal image. She wasn't talking. She was just crying. A deep, hopeless, silent breakdown. She finally put her hand on the cold window glass, her palm facing the moon. Facing him. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice so broken it was barely a sound. "I'm so alone. I'm so tired. Please somebody, anybody just see me. Please, I don't want to be alone tonight." In his cold, blue-lit station, Zephyr watched. Her plea hit him not as sound, but as a physical force. "You are not alone," he whispered back, his own voice rusty from disuse. He looked at the main control console. A large crimson-red panel glowed with a warning. Planetary protocol engaged. Any contact was forbidden. To introde the planet was the ultimate transgression. It meant sacrificing everything. His people, his past, his very existence. He would become a defector, a contamination. He would be hunted. Selena on the screen sank to the floor, her shoulders shaking. "Please!" Zephyr slammed his hand onto the red panel. Alarms blared, filling the silent station with a screaming wail. "Warning, Prime Directive violation, quarantine breach imminent." He ignored them. He was already in the transport buffer. The last thing he saw before his world dissolved into light was her tear-streaked face, illuminated by the moonlight, by his light. The transgression. His arrival was not gentle. It was not a graceful, shimmering teleport. It was a transgression, a quarantine breach, and it was agony. His civilization didn't travel to developing worlds. The technology was forbidden, locked away. He had used an emergency, one-way, non-sanctioned system. It was designed to tear a being apart atom by atom and force it through the fabric of space. It was not designed for a return trip. He materialized in a violent flash of light, not in a ship but as a man, falling from the air. He crashed through the high branches of a massive pine tree, his body tearing through the foliage, and slammed into the muddy, rain-soaked earth. He lay there, gasping as his human senses, flared to life for the first time. It was an assault. The first thing he felt was cold. A deep, wet, seeping cold that chilled him to his very core. His station was always a perfect, regulated temperature. This was real. The second was the rain. It was a gothic, torrential downpour. It wasn't the sterile, recycled water of his station. It was loud, chaotic, and relentless. He felt every drop hit his skin like a tiny needle. The third was smell. The overwhelming, rich, loamy scent of pine, wet dirt, and decaying leaves. He was in the dense forest that bordered Selena's backyard. He was wearing only his simple, thin, gray uniform, which was already soaked through and covered in mud. He was a defector, an infiltrator, and he was more vulnerable than he had ever been in his entire existence. He tried to stand, but his new legs were weak, uncoordinated. He stumbled, catching himself on the rough bark of a tree. His lungs burned with the cold, heavy, oxygen-rich air. He had heard and seen Earth for decades, but he had never felt it. But even through the sensory chaos, one thing was clear. A signal, a beacon, a feeling he had chased across the void. Her. He could feel her just a few hundred yards away. Her loneliness. It was a tangible thing, a pull. He stumbled out of the trees, his feet sinking into the mud of her backyard. And he saw her. She was there, just inside the sliding glass door of her back porch, just as he had seen her on his monitor. She was on the floor, her back against the wall, her head buried in her arms. He stopped. He just stood there, in the middle of her yard in the pouring rain, staring. He was the man in the moon come tumbling down. Inside, Selena heard a sound, a snap like a twig breaking. It was different from the sound of the rain. She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, and she saw him, a man. Or a boy, he looked about her age. He was just standing in her backyard, in the middle of the storm, staring right at her. Her heart stopped. Her blood ran cold. This was Arbor Falls. People didn't just stand in other people's backyards. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. Call 911, lock the doors. But she didn't, she just stared back. He wasn't moving like a threat. He wasn't dressed like a local. He was just there, soaked to the bone, pale and looking at her. His eyes, she could see his eyes even from here. They weren't angry. They weren't crazy. They were she didn't know. Zephyr took one slow, unsteady step toward the house. Selena flinched. He took another. He wasn't walking to the house. He was walking to her. He walked right up onto the small wooden porch, stopping just inches from the glass door. He was real. He was right there. He just stood there, dripping, shivering, and looking at her through the glass. He didn't try the handle. He didn't knock. He just waited, as if he had crossed the universe to be in this exact spot, and the next move was hers. The first word time seemed to stop. There was only the sound of the drowning rain and her own heart hammering in her chest. A stranger was on her porch, a strange, impossible man who had appeared out of the woods. Every part of her survival instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to call for help. But she was rooted to the spot. She was looking at his eyes. She had never seen eyes like that. They were a pale, impossible shade of gray like the color of the moon's surface, and they were filled with a raw, profound recognition. He was looking at her as if he knew her, and in those eyes she saw the same emotion she saw in the mirror every single morning, a loneliness so deep it was a universe unto itself. He didn't move. He just watched her, his breath fogging the glass. Slowly her hand moved to the lock on the sliding door. This was crazy. This was the stupidest, most dangerous thing she had ever done. She was an 18-year-old girl, alone. She unlocked it. She pulled the door open just a crack, letting in a spray of cold rain and the scent of pine. Who are you?" Her voice was a trembling whisper. "Are you okay?" Zephyr stared at her, mesmerized. He had heard this voice every day for her entire life, but it was the first time he'd heard it with his ears, not through a sensor. It was beautiful. He tried to speak. He had catalogued the entire English language, every dialect, every nuance, but he had never formed the words with a human tongue. His first attempt was a rough, guttural vibration. Says as he focused, he centered himself. He looked right at her and spoke his first word on earth. Selena. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't just that he knew her name. It was how he said it. Not Selena Vance, the name on the school roster. He said it the way her mother used to say it, softly. Selena. How do you know my name? She whispered, her hand tightening on the door. He struggled, the words clumsy, the sensations of his new body distracting him. I heard you. Heard me. Heard me what? I don't know you. He needed to prove it. He needed her to understand. He reached into his memory, pulling the data from just an hour ago, the things she had whispered to the moon. You missed them, he managed, his voice rough. You found the guitar. It is out of tune. You are so alone. Selena stopped breathing. It was impossible. Those were her words, her exact words, the words she had spoken to the moon in her dark, empty room. No one could have heard her. No one. She looked at him, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of the impossible. The man, the rain, the moon. Her words, who, what are you? He looked past her, up through the house toward her bedroom window. Then he looked back at her. I was the one who listened. She stared, her mouth open. The moon? He gave a small, shivering nod. I am Zephyr. You called. You didn't want to be alone. The man in the moon. The faithful witness. It wasn't a metaphor. He was real. The shock of the revelation, the impossibility of it all was too much. But before she could say another word, Zephyr's eyes rolled back in his head. The transition, the sensory overload, the cold. His new human body had hit its limit. He collapsed, falling forward right through the open door and onto her kitchen floor. He was unconscious. Selena stood frozen for a second, the rain blowing in through the open door. Her entire life she had wished for a friend. She had prayed to the stars, to the moon for someone, and the universe had answered. In the most terrifying, impossible way, she looked at the collapsed alien boy on her floor. She looked out at the dark, empty woods. She made a choice. She grabbed the handle of the sliding glass door and pulled it shut. The thud of the lock clicking into place was the loudest sound she had ever heard. Her world, her tiny, lonely, predictable world, had just been broken open, and she was, for the very first time, not alone. The shelter. He woke up to a new sensation, warmth. It was confusing. His station was regulated. This was different. This was a heavy warmth. He opened his eyes. He wasn't on the cold, muddy ground. He was on something soft, a couch. A thick knitted blanket was draped over him. He sat up, his head pounding. His clothes were gone. He was dressed in something else. Soft cotton pants and a sweatshirt. They were too big for him. They smelled clean, like soap. You're awake, he turned. Selena was sitting in a chair across the room, her knees pulled up to her chest, watching him. She looked terrified. Your clothes were soaked. I put them in the dryer. Those were my dad's, she said, her voice small. I hope that's okay. Zephyr just stared. He was in her house. He had seen it on his monitors for years, but the smell smelled like dust and old books and her. I made you this, she said, gesturing to a mug on the coffee table. It's hot chocolate. It's good for when you're cold. He looked at the mug. He had observed humans consuming liquids. He had never done it himself. He picked it up. It was hot. Another new sensation. He brought it to his lips and took a small sip. His entire nervous system exploded. It was sweet. It was warm. It was overwhelming. Is it bad? She asked, seeing his shocked expression. It is loud, he said, his voice clearer now. He was learning, his brain rapidly adapting to his new vocal cords. Loud? She asked, confused. My world, we do not have this. He looked at her, his expression one of pure, childlike wonder. It is good. She let out a small, nervous laugh. Okay, good. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the gothic rain against the windows. So, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. You're an alien. He nodded. Yes, and you've been listening to me? My whole life? He nodded again. Not your whole life. Only since you were 5. Your signal, it was pure. different from the noise. The noise? Humanity. It is so loud. Everyone is shouting. In their heads. But you were just talking. To me. Selena processed this. A lifetime of her most private, secret, embarrassing thoughts had been monitored. So you know everything. About me. I know your loneliness, he said, his gaze unflinching. It resonates with my own. She had a million questions. Why are you here? You said it was forbidden? It is, he said, his voice flat. It is the Prime Directive. The greatest law. We watch, we do not interfere. Then why? She asked. The single most important question in her universe. Why break it for me? Zephyr looked at her. He had crossed an impossible void. He had given up his home. He had become a defector, a hunted being. He tried to find the words to explain an emotion his own people didn't even have a name for. He finally found the simplest, most honest answer. Because you asked, he said, his voice soft. You were alone, and I was alone too. I could not log your distress call and do nothing. Tears welled up in Selena's eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears of something else, relief, disbelief. What happens now? She asked. I do not know, Zephyr said. I have never been. I have only watched. I am new. She looked at this impossible boy, this alien who was now a refugee in her living room. He was like a child experiencing the world for the first time. She, the lonely girl who had no one to take care of, suddenly had a purpose. Okay, she said, her voice a little stronger. Okay, well, first you need a new name. Zephyr is a little obvious. He looked confused. An Earth name, she said. We can't tell people. They'll freak out. We need a story. He just nodded. Okay, she looked at him. This lonely one who had come from the sky. Liam, she said. Your name is Liam. You're my cousin from out of town. You're staying with me for a while. He tested the name. Liam. He gave her a small, uncertain smile. I like it. She smiled back. A real, genuine smile. It was the first time she had smiled in 6 months. The loneliness in the house, it wasn't gone. But for the first time, it had company. The consequence. The first week was a strange, beautiful, and clumsy dance. Selena, who had been struggling just to get out of bed, was now a divine counselor, to a being who was a genius in quantum physics but was genuinely baffled by a doorknob. Liam, as he was now known, was a fast learner, but he was learning everything. He was mesmerized by the simple things. He'd spend an hour watching the way dust motes danced in a sunbeam. He discovered music and Selena watched, laughing, as he tried to understand why a combination of sounds could make him feel sad or happy. He had never eaten. His people absorbed nutrients through a sterile nutrient mist. The first time Selena gave him an apple, he held it for 10 minutes just studying its imperfect shape, its loud color. Then he bit into it. The crunch, the taste, it was a revelation. In return, he helped. The leaking faucet in the bathroom that she had ignored for months, he realigned the molecular structure of the washer. It was fixed in 5 seconds. The house was no longer just her prison. It was their project. And it was no longer silent. For the first time in 6 months, there was laughter in that house. Selena taught him bad jokes. He taught her how to see the energy patterns of the trees. She, the goddess of the moon, was finally truly seen. And he, the lonely one, was finally truly home. The town of Arbor Falls noticed. The orphan girl wasn't moping anymore. She was smiling. She was seen at the grocery store with a new boy, a handsome, if awkward, cousin. They were laughing. The whispers changed. From pity to curiosity, Selena felt normal. But the idyllic peace was fragile. One night, about 2 weeks after his arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the actual moon rise. Selena was happy, pointing out the constellations. But Liam Zephyr was tense. They know I am gone, he said, his voice quiet, his eyes locked on the sky. Selena's smile faded. Who knows? My people, he said. The Commonwealth. The Watchers. The Prime Directive, it is absolute. I am a defector. So what? They'll come for you? They'll take you back? Zephyr turned to her and his moon-gray eyes were dark. They do not take back contaminants. Contaminants? Me, he said. And by association, this world. You. He explained the consequence of his transgression. His people didn't just punish defectors. They cleansed the contamination. They erased their mistakes. His arrival here, his act of love, hadn't just saved her. It had put a target on her entire planet. They will send infiltrators, he said. Beings like me, but hunters. Cleaners. To fix what I broke. Selena's new fragile world shattered. You have to go, she whispered, terrified. You have to leave. Tell them I'm not a threat. There is no go back, he said, his voice flat. This transport was one way, and even if I could, I would not. He stood up and faced her. He was no longer the lost, confused boy who had collapsed on her floor. He was something else, something strong. I am Zephyr, he said. The lonely one. And you are Selena, the moon goddess. I have watched you be alone your entire life. I will not let you be alone now. He took her hand. His hand was warm and real. They are coming, he said, looking back up at the stars. I do not know when, but I am here. This time you are not alone. And neither am I. She looked at their joined hands. She looked him up at the sky. The love story was over. The fight was about to begin, and that is where we leave Selena and Zephyr for now. A story that started with two lonely souls and is about to become a fight for the entire planet. What did you think? Did you enjoy this story of a cosmic connection? If you did and you want to support this channel and hear what happens next, the best things you can do are hit that like button, share this story with someone you think would love it, and of course, subscribe and ring that bell for more stories every week. We have a whole playlist of other deep dive stories, and I highly recommend you check that out on the channel page. And finally, I would love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite part of this story? And what do you think Selena and Zephyr should do next? I'm always looking for suggestions for future tales, so let me know in the comments. Thank you again for listening. Be kind, be safe, and I wish you all the very best. We'll see you in the next story.